Okay, so boys and girls, in science, we started talking about forces over the last week, and we're going to continue to talk about forces today. Now, how many of you have ever pushed a box? And when there's nobody on the other side, it pushes pretty easily as long as you're not on a really hard surface, right? Well, what if you had somebody else pushing against that box at the same time? Almost like you're playing tug of war. How many of you have played tug of war? What happens when both teams are pulling with the same amount of force? Does the rope go anywhere? No, it stays in the middle, doesn't it? Well, the same thing happens if two people are pushing against the same object at the same time with the same amount of force. That box or that object's not going to move. It's going to stay in that spot. That's because the forces are what we call balanced. It's like being on a balance board. When they're the same, it's not going to move. So with tug of war, if you're pulling with the same amount of force, that rope isn't going to move. It's going to stay there. Same thing with that box. If you're both pushing against that box with the same amount of force, the box is going to stay in that same spot. It's not going to move. But if, in tug of war, one side starts pulling a little bit harder than the other, what happens to that rope? It starts to move. And if one person pushes harder than the other person, what happens to that box? It starts to move. That's because the forces are no longer balanced. They're what we call unbalanced. They're uneven. They're unequal. And so when forces are not balanced, objects move. And this, boys and girls, remember Newton from earlier? This would be Newton's third law of motion. So when forces are balanced, when they're equal, whatever object that forces are acting on, it's not going anywhere. But when a force is unbalanced, when they're unequal, whatever object those forces are acting on, then it's going to move. That's why in tug of war, when one side pulls harder than the other, that rope moves because the forces are unbalanced. So over the next couple of days, you're going to have a mystery science activity to do and some questions to answer after this short video about balanced and unbalanced forces. Keeping in mind that when forces are balanced, the object stays the same, doesn't move. When two people are pushing against the box, that box doesn't go anywhere. When two teams are pulling with equal force, that rope doesn't move. But when forces are unbalanced or unequal, that's when objects move. And that is Newton's third law of motion.